Today you are marrying a woman, not in secret but with a ceremony, witnesses, incense, candles, and vows. Right in front of the statue of Guanyin, the two of you stand together while your sisters watch from either side. You make promises to each other, pledging to live and eat together until you grow old. If one of you passes away first, the other must remain faithful, just as a widow would. Your ceremony is no different from a traditional wedding between a man and a woman, except one thing, you are both women. This is Shunde, Guangdong, in the late Qing dynasty. It happens in broad daylight, not at night, not in secret. Your neighbors know, your families know, the whole village knows. No one finds it strange. How did you end up here? You were born into an ordinary family in Shunde. Your father grew mulberry trees. Your mother reeled silk. This was the most ordinary life in Shunde. But when you started working at the silk factory at the age of 14, something appeared in your life that would have been unimaginable in your grandmother's generation. You had your own money. Not much, but it was yours. On the day you received your first paycheck, you clutched those copper coins in your hand and stood at the factory gate for a long time. You weren't thinking about what to buy. You were thinking, this is mine. For all the women before you, their fate was this: marry a man chosen by their family, move into his home, bear his children, care for his parents, and after her husband died, she would live as a widow until she died. That was all. But at the end of the 19th century, Shunda's silk industry suddenly boomed. A large number of silk reeling factories needed female workers. Women's hands were more dexterous than men's. They handled the silkworm cocoons with greater care. The factories were willing to hire and pay them wages. And so something happened that had never occurred in the entire history of China. Large numbers of women began to gain economic independence. When a woman no longer needed to rely on a man for support, she began to ask a question that no one had ever asked before. Why must I get married? Someone in your village asked that question, and then the entire Pearl River Delta began to stir. At first, one or two women refused to marry, then 10, then a whole group. They supported and emboldened one another. When their families pressured them to marry, they would go together to the temple and swear before the deity that they would never marry. Once the oath was taken, their families could do nothing because in those days, breaking a vow to the gods was an extremely serious matter, more serious than defying their parents' orders. They had discovered this loophole and they used it to protect themselves. If the family's pressure became truly unbearable, there was one final resort. The sisters would go together, not to persuade, but to accompany the woman being forced into marriage to her death. This was no idle threat. Historical records confirm that in some places, it actually happened. Groups of women collectively chose death to resist marriage. Once such an incident occurred, the entire village would know, and no one would dare to easily coerce the women of that land again. They drew a line in the sand with the most drastic means possible. The price of crossing that line is too high. Next comes the ritual. You must perform the self-combing. This means styling your hair into the bun worn by married women. Typically, unmarried women wear braids, while married women wear buns. By styling your hair into a bun yourself, you signify that you have married yourself, or the life you have chosen. The ceremony is very formal. You must bathe, change into new clothes, prepare offerings, burn incense before a statue of Guanyin, and kneel to swear an oath before the deity. The vow is to remain unmarried for life and never set foot in a man's home. An older self-bound woman would help you style your hair. While she did so, you had to remain kneeling, with your sisters present as witnesses. Sometimes neighbors would come to watch. This was not something to be hidden. It was a public rite of passage in your life. From that day forward, you were a self-bound woman. You were 16 on the day you became a self-combed woman. Your parents wept, not because they opposed it, but because they knew you had chosen a path with no security. Who would care for you in your old age? Who would perform your funeral rites when you died? Where would your spirit tablet be placed? In that era, these were not merely sentimental questions. They were real matters of survival. A woman without a son to perform her rites would be a lonely spirit in the afterlife. This was something people of that time truly believed. You knew all this, yet you still had combed your hair neatly, then returned to the factory. Life at the silk factory had its own rhythm. Every morning, you'd get up before dawn. You'd walk into the steamy workshop where large iron pots of boiling water simmered, filled with silk cocoons. You'd use your hands to find the silk threads inside the cocoons, wind them around the spool of the reeling machine, and then pull them out, lap by lap. Silk is finer than a strand of hair. It requires extreme concentration to keep the thread unbroken. Your hands were constantly in the hot water, and the skin on your fingers takes on a peculiar pallor, soft and sometimes cracked. You don't mind. All the female workers in your factory have hands like this. Once you've drawn out all the silk from one cocoon, you must immediately find the end of the next one and attach it. It must not break. If it breaks, it's a reject. At first, you broke the thread often. Your hands weren't quick enough. Your eyes weren't steady enough. The veteran worker beside you said nothing, just went about her work. You watched her hands. You learned. 3 months later, you broke the thread just as rarely as the veteran worker. Your wages went up a little. You clutched that small raise in your fist. You recall the feeling you had when you first received your pay at 14. It's still that same feeling. This is mine. The female workers in the factory formed a community incomprehensible to outsiders. You had your own language, your own songs, your own rules. You called each other sisters, not as a metaphor, but truly like sisters. You shared a dormitory, ate the same meals, and sat together after work singing songs of the sea. Some of those songs were about work, some about homesickness, and some about another person, singing of, "I'll tilt my jade hairpin into the cloud of your bun," or "Gently I'll place my finger to gently brush your delicate face," or "Though the lotus stem is severed, the threads remain. I'd rather die than part from you." These songs are unashamed, singing of the feelings between women. Everyone understands them. No one finds anything wrong with them, and no one needs to hide or conceal anything. The people of this land have always known this kind of feeling exists. They just never gave it a formal name. The Golden Orchid Pledge, the most formal commitment between two women. You met her at the factory. You joined the factory in the same batch. Your silk reeling machines were placed side by side. You talked every day. After work, you walked back to the dormitory together. You slept in bunk beds. You knew each other's family matters. You knew each other's deepest fears. Then, one day, you decided to form a Golden Orchid Pact. The Golden Orchid Pact ceremony is much like a wedding. You choose an auspicious day. You bathe and change into your finest clothes. You swear an oath to each other before a divine image. You exchange tokens of your bond. You make a covenant, vowing to share both joy and sorrow in the future, and promising that if one of you dies first, the other will remain faithful to her memory. Your sisters come to bear witness. You share a meal that carries the same significance as a wedding banquet. Afterward, you belong to each other. She is called your pact sister, and you are called her covenant companion. Qingbai Lei Chao. This Qing dynasty collection of short stories records that the custom of the Golden Orchid Pact was most prevalent in Shunda. This was not a marginal phenomenon, nor was it a secret. It was common knowledge throughout Shunda. Local annals documented it, scholars wrote about it in their books, and officials were aware of its existence. They turned a blind eye because these women paid their taxes on time, caused no trouble, and worked diligently in the silk mills. How they chose to live their lives was none of the officials' business. The days you spent with your covenant partner were the most ordinary, yet most authentic days of your life. You worked together, ate together, and saved money together. You'd argue over who used a little too much oil in the lamp that day, then go to work together the next morning as if nothing had happened. When one of you fell ill, you'd stay by their side, using your limited funds to buy medicine and cook congee. Your lives were interwoven with those small, everyday habits. She knew what you didn't like to eat, and you know she grinds her teeth in her sleep. These things aren't grand or legendary, but they make up a real life. You worked together at the factory for several more years. Then, the silk industry began to decline. Artificial silk from Japan appeared on the market, and silk factories in Shunde started going out of business. You lost your jobs, but you had no intention of going home to get married. You heard about the South Seas, Singapore, Malaysia, places where wealthy families needed domestic helpers, and the wages were better than in Shunda. You discussed it with a few sisters, then you packed your bags, boarded a ship. They sailed across the ocean, and eventually brought back enough to buy the entire village. Life in the South Seas was not easy. You lived in your employer's homes taking care of children, cooking, and cleaning. No one there understood your Cantonese, so you slowly picked up a bit of the local language. Sometimes your employer's children learned your language before you did. You communicated with each other in a strange mix of Cantonese and Malay. You saved every penny and sent it back to Guangdong. In Singapore and Malaysia, the Cantonese Zisu women formed their own communities. You referred jobs to one another, cared for the sick, and kept vigil at the bedsides of the dying. You rebuilt the Shunda way of life in a foreign land. When someone fell ill, everyone came to care for them. When someone grew too old to walk, everyone took turns helping. You had no family, no husbands, no sons, but you had each other. Your money was sent back to Guangdong from Nanyang in batches, not small sums, but money that was truly transforming that land. Villagers in Shatu Village, Junan Town, Shunde, later said that most of the old buildings in the village, over 20 years old, were built with money sent back by the self-married women from overseas. Those buildings still stand today, blue bricks and gray tiles, simple yet sturdy. They are the homes built by a group of women with their labor in a foreign land. They themselves may not have lived in them, but their parents and brothers did. They sent money back because they still remembered that land, even though, back then, that land had given them no reason to stay. When you returned to Guangdong in your old age, the People's Republic of China had been established and many things had changed. Yet, in Junan, Shunde, there was a residence built specifically for the self-bound women called Bingyutang. It was funded by the women themselves, designed to provide elderly self-bound women with a place to live and care without having to rely on any family. Later, the last group of self-bound women lived there, drinking coffee, playing cards, chatting, and waiting. Your soulmate passed away before you did. You kept vigil by her bedside during her final days. When she passed, you held her hand. You remained faithful to her, just as you had sworn to do back then. Then, you lived alone in Bingyu Tang. You drank coffee, played cards, and sometimes sang those Cantonese folk songs you used to sing together in the factory when you were young. The world outside has changed several times over. When you became a self-bound woman at 16, the Qing dynasty still stood. By the time you grew old, it was already the new China. You lived through war, through revolution, through a world turned upside down. Yet you simply remained in the life you chose for yourself, braiding your own hair and keeping your own vows. The last of the self-bound women passed away one after another at the end of the 20th century. That era had come to an end. The silk factory in Shunde had long since disappeared. Bingyutang is now a museum filled with photographs, artifacts, and the belongings left behind by those women, including the lyrics to the songs they sang in the factory during their youth. One lyric goes, "Though the lotus stem is severed, the threads remain. I'd rather die than part from my beloved." It speaks of a woman's longing for another woman, simple, direct, and without any pretense. The female factory workers of Shunde in that era didn't need metaphors to express. They sang them out loud, then went back to reeling their silk. Journalists interviewed the last few surviving elders. When they spoke of the past and of their sworn sisters, their faces bore an expression that outsiders find hard to describe. Not sadness, not entirely, but a kind of serenity that comes only after enduring so much. In a Shunde silk factory during the late Qing dynasty, you earned your first copper coin with your own hands. That single coin taught you something. You did not have to marry. In that era, this was a revolution that a group of women dedicated their entire lives to putting into practice. They had no banners, no slogans, only a comb and the vows they made before the statue of Guanyin, along with those hands, soaked in hot water for so long that the skin, once white and soft from soaking in hot water, those hands transformed a region, altered the destinies of a group of women, and perhaps even changed your perspective on the notion that one must marry. If you are the one reading this history,